The hacker known as Fortune tried to stifle us. They have only recommitted us to the task. Tonight, we take yet another look at some boundary-pushing trans folk. Trans Trailblazers 2, tonight on Deep Fat Fried.
Deep Fat Fried!
Alrighty then.
You risked the wrath of fortune once, Paul?
Why have you done this to us, Paul?
But yet
Bring the
again,
wrath of fortune down upon us all.
Paul versus Paul. Oh, no.
I'm going to win.
You are?
I'm going to scalp some more views off of these morons.
Cool.
Some more engagement.
Sounds like a strategy.
I'm offended by this episode.
That's really all that happened. They stopped by, they brought a bunch of views and left behind a bunch of engagement. It's like, thanks, dipshits.
Yeah, please get offended again.
So even though I can almost guarantee you don't recognize our first trans trailblazer, you are, I guarantee both of you are familiar with her work. This is Wendy Carlos.
I ain't familiar with nothing.
Oh, I guarantee you are. So
I ain't familiar with shit, Paul.
Wendy Carlos rose to prominence, being one of the first composers that heavily utilized electronic music and was behind some truly iconic film scores. Unfortunately, due to YouTube's suffocating policies, we aren't going to be able to let you listen to most of it, but we'll listen to some, you know what I mean, some little blurbs.
Boo tube. Yeah.
Her accomplishments are well known enough that you've certainly heard some of the most prominent examples of her work. Like I said, and we'll get into that. So Wendy Carlos studied physics and music at Brown University before moving to Columbia University to specialize in music composition. She was able to attend these prestigious universities because of a scholarship she won, building a computer at age 14. This was in 1953. So, you know, I mean, building a computer now, it's pretty paint by numbers. Building a computer in 1953 required soldering and wiring.
But it puts you on the cutting edge. Then I mean, that was before like they'd even built like Apple computers and shit. That's like the really early time in America where people were just, I mean, computers had existed, but the general public was kind of becoming aware of them.
And computers were like room filling devices too. They were huge.
Yeah, with vacuum tubes and shit. They're crazy. Yeah.
So during her time at Columbia, Wendy Carlos met Robert Moog, another famous name, and gave advice and technical assistance in the development of the famous Moog synthesizer.
Oh, heard of those, yeah.
Yeah, Moog! Yeah, I like it.
Convincing Moog to add a touch-sensitive device for greater musical dynamics. So Moog synthesizer had a little stylus-based system that you could, you know, like move shit around and really start making actual music electronically with different notes and different sounds and stuff. By the way, at this point in the research, anybody want to guess who she ended up working with a lot, given the time and knowing the type of music she made? Well, TJ, you probably already know because she pulled the fucking goddamn shit. Scotty, though, maybe I don't know.
I pretty much do that in zombie mode when I first wake up in the morning. So I honestly don't know.
So it was the 60s or what was going on?
She was at helping Moog develop the synthesizer when she was at Columbia in the 60s.
The 60s. I don't know. Honestly, I mean, I'm not too as far as like I have some 60s rock bands, but I don't think they were using synthesized music, at least not to my knowledge.
Sure. So the modular synth, which is pictured here actually on the cover of this, work that she worked on. It was huge. So it was about the same width as an upright piano, 1.5 times the height. The front panels were covered in dials, switches, and patch cables. The instrument resembled a particularly chaotic and antique telephone exchange. By 1966, Carlos owned a smaller Moog synthesizer, which she used to record sound effects and jingles for television commercials, which later earned her anywhere from $100 to $1,000, depending on the commercial. Started making money, making music with one of these things.
trans electronic music production.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
based. So the Moog synthesizer, due to its size and its unique kind of existence, it being the only piece of equipment that could do what it did, and its novelty, it was incredibly expensive. So she Wendy Carlos bartered with Moog to collaborate with him in exchange for being able to own one. Nearly 10 years after she met Moog, she met her friend and business partner, Rachel Elkind, and thanks to Elkind's previous experience as a record producer, Columbia Records granted the duo artistic freedom to pursue a synthesized album of Bach's compositions as part of their Bach to Rock sales campaign. This campaign, until including Wendy's music, did not have a single modern rendition of any of Bach's works planned. So she came in and was like, well, we're calling it like Bach to Rock and we're not covering any Bach. So she actually made it into the project that it ended up being. Since the synthesizer could only perform one note at a time, the recording process, as you can imagine, was tedious. Switched on Bach was the best-selling classical album ever when it was released in 1968, and the first to go platinum. It remained at number one in the classical charts for more than 3 years. It peaked at number 10 on the pop charts. It won 3 Grammys, and it brought synthesizers out of electronics labs and into the musical mainstream. So this is basically like the album that invented electronic music, right?
Well, it's gotta be mind blowing too. 1968 to here's, and it's like the original vision's like, yeah, a bunch of people be rocking out to Bach, and it's like, well, we make this like this basically synthesized music, which you have to imagine 1968, no one's gonna expect that. So it's like it's such a novelty. I'm not surprised it had the acclaim it had.
So, of course, because it got so big, she got the attention of some pretty big names, particularly one giant name. Wendy Carlos eventually caught the attention of Stanley Kubrick due to Switched on Bach. As she describes it, we, meaning Carlos and her partner Elkind, finally wound up talking with someone who had a close connection to Stanley Kubrick's lawyer. And we suddenly get this invitation to fly to London. Before Carlos knew about the offer, she read the book and began writing a piece about it named Time Steps. We're talking about Clockwork Orange here.
Right.
Carlos, for people who can't see the screen, Carlos later described the project as a lot of fun, a pleasurable venture. So she did all the music for A Clockwork Orange.
Cool.
Oh, yeah.
We could start this at around, it should
That's a great theme too.
24
You
seconds.
can play about 5 seconds of this to refresh your memories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
no,
just
I didn't need a refresher on that particular
A very memorable
piece of
score.
music, because like that, like the music is like, it definitely sets the tone in the fucking film.
Kubrick's genius right there too, recognizing this music and bringing someone as talented as Wendy Carlos into the whole scheme.
You know, obviously he's like throughout his career on the cutting edge of fucking filmmaking technology, including fucking music. Cause like the dude just lived, ate, breathed shit, whatever. Everything was movies for that guy.
Yeah.
So like he was singularly obsessed with whatever project he was working on. So bringing in someone who's on the cutting edge of music makes perfect sense for fucking Kubrick.
So Wendy released an album after this called Walter Carlos, which is her dead name,
Right.
Clockwork Orange, with her full compositions for A Clockwork Orange in 1972, including several songs that were either cut from the film or trimmed to be shorter. She used her birth name because she was not yet out as a transgender woman. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the album was re-released under the name Wendy Carlos.
Cool.
So in 79, Carlos raised public awareness of transgender issues by disclosing that she'd been living as a woman since at least 1968. And in 1972, had undergone sex reassignment surgery. Wendy Carlos debuted to the world in the May 1979 issue of Playboy. As you can see here, the article was presented as Wendy/Walter Carlos, with a description: composer-performer Carlos, a pioneer of synthesizer music, underwent sex change operations 7 years ago that he kept secret until now. Having seen both sides, Wendy Carlos frankly discusses her unique case of transsexualism. So
you can tell there's some confusion as about how to write about this, because it's like alternating between names, it's alternating between pronouns. It's just like, we don't know.
Yeah, I think if you click on this, it'll blow it up a little bit so you can actually see that. Even just, yeah, there you go. You can see it down there. So, they weren't, you got to understand, like,
sure. I mean,
this seems pretty nasty and not woke now, but the Playboy was one of the only
I'll put it in the context of 1979
right.
for sure. Like the language evolution hadn't even gone to the point where it is now. So
right. So in this interview, she also mentions a fellow trans trailblazer, Christine Jorgensen, who we covered
from our previous episode.
In our previous episode, yep. Sharing her story meant forever changing her relationship with her family and the public, opening herself up to abuse and scrutiny beyond reason, and risking professional ruin. Yet Carlos did it anyway. So this is a ballsy thing. You got to understand, she's got this burgeoning music career. She understands that the world is stacked against people like her. And she comes out before the 80s, right?
Yeah, 1979 here. Yeah.
Pretty crazy. For her, the journey of personally claiming her gender had prepared her for the hard work of owning it publicly. Transsexuality is a crash course in dealing with the fear of rejection, she declared. A guideline for the existential tension conjured by one's very existence. What?
So it's nothing. I was just...
Yeah, no,
I forgot to start the timer.
Yeah, it was nothing with the episode.
I got my eyeballs on it. It's
the foibles of TJ.
Yeah, I'm just an idiot.
The ongoing foibles of TJ. So obviously, Wendy being transgender didn't bother Kubrick at all, who asked her to work with him again to compose the score for his psychological horror film The Shining in 1980. Before filming began,
that's a great score.
Oh yeah, another
I
great.
Just think about that fucking opening notes of that movie. Fucking just that big when they're doing that aerial shot of the car driving up the fucking winding road on the mountain pass and shit, and that boom. I don't even want to do it with my mouth.
Well, we'll play a little bit of it here in a minute.
Oh, cool, dope. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, so he asked her to work with him again before filming. She and her musical partner Elkind read the book. Read Stephen King's book as per Kubrick's suggestion. So this whole idea that Kubrick wanted to like murder King's book comes under.
And when Chelsea was telling me, has read The Shining. I have actually not read the book, but she was telling me like the movie is not all that different from the fucking book.
It isn't. I've read The Shining a bunch of times. It's not.
It's not this dramatic departure that I've been led to believe.
Kubrick hated Stephen King. Yeah, come on.
I think that maybe Kubrick just fucking wanted to do his own thing with it. But I don't think he fucking totally shit on it or anything.
It's a different medium, so of course you're gonna do something different.
Yeah. Anyway, whatever. That's us an aside.
Yep. Carlos recorded a considerable amount of music, but Kubrick ended up using mostly music by several avant-garde composers he had used as guide tracks in the final version. The Shining original motion picture soundtrack, released in 1980 on Warner Brothers Records, features 2 tracks credited to Carlos and Elkind, the main title theme, which is the one you're just talking about, and the Rocky Mountains theme. So here's the main title theme. The next thing, I think it should be time stamped.
Probably it's the best piece of music in the fucking movie.
So we can do about 5-10 seconds of this.
All right. Cool.
So I mean,
this actually recurs in the movie several times as well.
Yeah,
I like the part. There's a part that I really love when it's like really starts hitting these like more boom, boom, kind of notes and shit.
Yep.
I wish we could play the fucking piece of music.
And some of the shots with Jack Nicholson just losing his mind and shit in the movie.
And you remember the silent scream? Danny's silent scream has this playing behind it.
Yeah.
So, probably the most memorable piece of soundtrack from The Shining, even though they didn't end up using her entire album, came from her. So shortly after the release of The Shining, she got the fucking call. She got the blessing, dude. She got the tap on the shoulder from the mouse himself.
Oh, shit.
The mouse himself, he who shall not be named, called up Wendy Carlos and asked her to compose the soundtrack for Tron. This is another fucking amazing soundtrack, iconic soundtrack.
And Wendy Carlos is a perfect fit for a movie like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, really.
Not only that, but
going into the grid, going into the machine. So I mean, this is the ideal score, and actually probably he was hugely inspirational to Daft Punk's Tron Legacy score, and they actually kept that motif. You'll notice.
Yep.
With going all electronica, which I thought was actually one of the few good decisions Disney made with that thing. But Paul, I know you have information.
Yeah. She wasn't interested this time in composing with solely electronic music. She wanted to incorporate an orchestra with it, and Disney had the money and was like, fine. So she recalled their demands were tightly specified. There wasn't a lot of elbow room, and that made it fun. So she had to like back and forth with them to get what she wanted, but eventually they gave her what she wanted, and proof is in the pudding. Let's listen to 5 or 10 seconds of this Tron theme here. Should be queued up.
Okie dokie. I'm not as familiar with this because I don't actually.
It's a great song.
It does really sound like video game music too.
I mean, that's what it was
cool.
inspired by, of course. So,
oh yeah,
she did a great job. Carlos had composed an epic score for the original film, blending choir, orchestra, organ, and a host of synthesizers. In 2010, Daft Punk composed the soundtrack for Tron Legacy, which is a remake of the not really a remake.
It's a sequel.
It's a sequel.
Yeah. Daft Punk leaned heavily on Wendy Carlos's original work for their contribution to the reboot. So Daft Punk basically went back to Wendy Carlos's work.
I know every fucking Daft Punk fan too sucks the fucking cock of that motherfucking work they did. Dude, like, oh, Daft Punk. I didn't really think. I don't know.
And honestly, I'm not a huge Daft Punk fan, but I like some electronica. But I think it was some of the best.
I was not. I didn't give a fuck about their soundtrack for Tron.
Okay,
Legacy
well, I completely disagree with you, but we don't have time to.
I think it's
it.
a bunch of goddamn trash. But whatever.
Okay,
this one seems
fair
all
enough.
right.
So as if
I
this
like
shit
score.
wasn't enough, being trans, working on all of this stuff. So her last album was released, ominously titled Tales of Heaven and Hell in 1998. Carlos, who's a prototypical polymath, found other sites where her role as a pioneer and innovator could flourish over the years. Most notably as an eclipse photographer, whose images have been published by NASA, as well as on the cover of Sky and Telescope. A self-proclaimed coronaphile, Carlos has journeyed throughout the world to capture images of various eclipses and has even developed her own technique of composite photography, which garnered appreciation by fellow astronomers. She retired from composing in 2005 and has largely hidden herself from the public ever since. So just went on, lived a bigger life than most people will live, despite being trans at a time when it was a horrible fucking time, came out at a time when it was horrible to be out as trans, and succeeded anyway. So
yeah,
definitely a trans trailblazer.
100%.
Traveled the world taking photos of eclipses, composed a bunch of stuff.
Just one of those people that
made advances in computing.
Whatever they're interested in doing, they just do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's how she is.
So let's move on to our next trailblazer. This is Dr. James Barry. Now, on our first Trans Trailblazers episode, we covered Alan L. Hart here, a transgender man that made incredibly important strides in tuberculosis research, if you'll remember, perhaps the first American to undergo gender-affirming surgery all the way back in 1918. Tonight, we'll cover another transgender man that was a pioneer in the medical field that predated Alan by quite a bit, interestingly enough. So James Barry, born in Cork, England in 1789. So we're talking about way back in the day. Second child born to Jeremiah and Marianne Buckley, and was given the name Margaret Ann. Marianne Bulkley, was the sister of James Barry, a celebrated Irish artist and professor of painting at London's Royal Academy. A third child appeared in the Bulkley family and was named Juliana. Although presented as being Barry's sister, it's likely that she was Barry's daughter as a result of childhood sexual assault. So, yeah, something that was pretty common back in the day, unfortunately. As after Barry's death, the chairwoman who discovered Barry's sex when laying out the body stated that pregnancy stretch marks were present. So after his uncle James Barry died, the soon-to-be doctor took his name and identity in order to enter medical school. So clad in an overcoat that was worn at all times, regardless of the weather, 3-inch high shoe inserts, and a distinctive high-pitched voice, Margaret now identified himself as James Barry. The young Barry enrolled at the University of Edinburgh Medical School in 1809, altered his age to match his young, boyish look. Rumors flew as Barry's short stature, high voice, slight build, and smooth skin caused many people to suspect that he was a child too young to be in medical school, but Barry never broke. When Barry wasn't allowed to sit for examinations because they suspected he was too young, Lord Erskine intervened. The soon-to-be doctor received a degree in medicine at the age of 22, and then enlisted in the army as an assistant surgeon, where once again his age was called into question, but he was eventually allowed to serve. So
basically, they don't really recognize that, like, the sex thing. They just think like this is
too young.
it must be too young.
like-
It just shows
know
you
there's-
that it was unthinkable at the time, right? For somebody
Right.
to
Too fresh face, too young, which makes more sense. A lot of people did it to join the military and other professions. They would just lie, like, how old are you? I'm 16. They'd be 13. And people be like, you're not, but whatever.
I don't think there's any sort of like hormone treatments at this time or anything either. So
No.
like this is just like, you just dress a certain way and like, change your voice as best you can naturally, and that's about it. That's about the most they can do for you at the
Well,
time,
if you
right?
meet someone, they present themselves a certain way, you're just going to be like, okay, that's just a small man or something. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
they're going to think of something like that, or too young. I mean, because like you're saying, like no one's going to, if you present yourself, I'm James Barry, you're not going to be like, you're actually this.
Right.
No, you're not going to do that.
So Barry began his military career on July 6th, 1813, as a hospital assistant in the British Army, and was soon promoted to assistant staff surgeon. That's equivalent to lieutenant. Then served in Cape Town, South Africa for 10 years, where he befriended the governor, Lord Charles Somerset, pictured here. Some believe that Somerset knew Barry's secret. The two grew close, and Barry moved into a private apartment at his residence. Somerset referred to Barry early on as a genius at medicine and absurd in everything else. Somerset often took Barry with him on hunting trips or to look at hippos or elephants. He introduced Barry to many of the important white political figures in South Africa. He protected Barry from being more severely punished than his tendency to be an unbelievable asshole towards people in power got him in trouble. So I guess Barry not only was an unapologetic trans man, but was also a dick who didn't have any kind of sense of decorum.
Especially when it came to dealing with them fucking rich fucks, it sounds like.
So he monetarily and politically also supported a lot of Barry's reforms. Rumors circulated about the nature of their relationship, and a poster was hung up by an anonymous accuser stating that Somerset was, quote, buggering Dr. Barry. Commissions were set up to investigate the scandal, but both parties were later exonerated, obviously. So
All
pretty
right.
funny shit.
Of course.
Get out of here.
In
fucking
Cape
assholes.
Town, things got interesting beyond just this unfortunate portrait, of course. This is a portrait of James Barry. So within a couple of weeks of getting there, Barry became medical inspector for the entire colony, even though he was only in his very early 20s. He was very adamant that clean water and a good diet were connected with good health, something that at the time, I guess, wasn't.
Nonsense. Proper
Clean water? What's next? People need to breathe fresh air? Disgusting.
One of his first acts as medical inspector was to figure out a better system to provide cleaner water to Cape Town, especially to the poorer areas.
What? To riff?
Yep.
Sorry.
The proletariat's clean water. What's next? Edible
I
food?
say.
Breathable air?
Give them too much.
He was also a strong believer in making available good medical care, fresh food, clean water to everyone, including the common soldiers, the poor, mentally ill, non-white people, prisoners, lepers. I mean, anything, any tier of society that you could find yourself on.
Very communist, socialist nightmare.
I guess if you were one of those things, you wanted to be in, and you were sick, you wanted to be in Cape Town at this time because the person running Cape Town actually had a fucking conscience. So he was incredibly quick to denounce anyone who felt he was taking advantage of or treating cruelly anyone from the aforementioned groups, which made him as many friends as you can imagine it did. So, people would, try and shout him down for paying equal attention to the poor and lepers and stuff. And he was like, fuck, we already heard that he was, had a lot of impropriety about him amongst people that could probably have his head chopped off. So you can imagine how he dealt with critics.
Doesn't care.
He also became known and hated for making every medical professional working publicly or privately licensed and regulated.
Oh my God. The state intervenes. I mean, come on. Yep. Who does? A doctor, that comes from here. It doesn't come from here. You
Look,
need to.
I can do surgery. Look, I got a knife right here. I cut. Look, till you got a problem with your back or something?
Look, if I had a problem with like my gallbladder or something,
I'd
go over to Sky, and be like, Sky, you got a knife, right?
I'm going to go and tell me I can't. I can cut you up.
I don't need no licensed, regulated, fancy doctor person.
Hell no, you don't.
I don't
just
need that
waste
shit.
Your money.
Just get yourself whiskey drunk. Let Scotty pull that gallbladder out.
Yeah, just rip that shit right out.
Show you back up, good as new.
If I die, I die. I would definitely die. Just so it's fucking clear.
He also became known and hated for making, like I said, every medical professional get licensed. Also licensed and regulated pharmacies and other drug sales. I mean, oh my God.
A bridge too far.
Yep. This was an attempt to cut back on poorly manufactured, often deadly drugs that were being made and sold by unlicensed and often untrained pharmacists.
Poppycock.
The businessman.
Government regulation.
When the government regulates these pharmacists, what's next?
This is a way better portrait here.
Yes,
so
I would say so.
Barry's push for reform, short temper, vocal discontent with red tape, often landed him in trouble. He was demoted, arrested, and even fought a duel with an army captain. So they had a fucking pow pow. On the personality front, Barry tended towards being cold, rude, opinionated, and insubordinate, I guess. My kind of guy. He was routinely disciplined for refusing to follow orders. Many other doctors found him impossible to work with. Even people who hated him, and there were a lot of them, admitted he was very good at his job. And that fact tended to keep him from getting into any real serious trouble. Like he would cuss out a fucking government official and they'd demote him, but then everything would go to shit again. And so they'd be like, all right, Barry, you can have your spot back.
Well, Barry,
just watch your mouth next time. His emphasis on cleanliness, clean water, well-regulated hospitals had noticeable impacts, especially when it came to preventing outbreaks of diseases like cholera, obviously. He was also not afraid of performing cutting-edge medical procedures, and while at Cape Town, presided over the first successful cesarean section where both mother and child survived within the colonies.
So wait, a doctor that's like so good that everyone puts up with the fact that he's a total asshole. That's the premise for House.
Right.
So this is just like trans 1800s House,
but real.
Yeah,
but not a character written to be an anti-hero, but actually real.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
After leaving Cape Town, James was moved around frequently throughout the British colonies. He served in the Crimean War, where he met Florence Nightingale, famous nurse. The two had a very public altercation, although over what, nobody really knows. Nightingale reportedly called him a brute and a blackguard in a letter to Lady Verney because of it. Probably because Barry reprimanded her in front of his soldiers and staff, which she felt was ungentlemanly of him. Dr. Barry, fuck that shit. Dr. Barry brought more variety to the soldiers' diets and rations. He pressed for ovens in the cookhouses of barracks so that the staff could cook a wider range of foods. He was a stickler for sanitation. He improved the drainage and sewer systems in the Quebec barracks. When he arrived in Canada, married soldiers and their wives did not have separate sleeping quarters. Instead, they lived in the barracks with the other soldiers. Barry believed that living amongst 10 or 20 men was degrading for women and would lead to alcoholism. He therefore established married quarters to provide privacy for families in the military.
Okay, so this is basically just a story about a person with common sense in a world devoid of it, going around.
Are you
just
trying
like,
to tell me I can't live in filth?
just using like
Yes.
their powers of assholery to fix the world. It's a beautiful thing.
Perhaps we should dig drainage, and families should have privacy, and better rations for soldiers, and
Perhaps we
clean
should-
water.
Absurd! Scandalous! You want these ruffians to have clean water and sanitation? What sort of world do you want us to live in? It's madness. He's quite mad, that Barry.
A ruffian and a blackguard he was.
A regular blackguard, indeed.
So Barry was retired from both medicine and the military in 1864, and he died a year later in London. Despite his personal wish that his body should not be examined under any circumstances following his death, a disgruntled former servant who claimed to have attended Barry's unclothed body approached Staff Surgeon Major Dr. McKinnon with knowledge concerning his biological sex. So he's basically outed after death despite his wishes.
Right, of course.
A letter from McKinnon states that the woman seemed to think that she had become acquainted with a great secret and wished to be paid for keeping it. I informed her that all Dr. Barry's relatives were dead and that it was not a secret of mine. She quickly took this information to the press, and articles such as "The Reputed Female Army Surgeon" were published around the world. In 1865, the revelation of Barry's supposed biological sex was a clear violation of both his privacy and his personal wishes. 155 years later, the significance of this knowledge, in combination with the archival materials that are available, it's clear. It provides increased visibility of queer, trans, non-binary, and intersex identities prior to the 21st century. So even though at the time it was kind of fucked up that against this person's wishes, he was, kind of painted as a woman.
It also,
Women who pose as men.
it also just demonstrates
more of
how,
a man than most of you fucking pieces
how
of shit.
people that act like trans stuff's everywhere. It's a new thing. It's like it's not.
Not new.
It's not new at all.
Not even vaguely new.
So
Not even remotely new.
even though this was a shitty thing that happened back then, it did let trans people and non-binary people know that Dr. James Barry was indeed a trans person, and they can learn about this stuff and realize that this was a person that fucking back in the 1700s was one of the best doctors in the world. You know what I mean? Amen. A pioneering doctor. So Dr. James Barry garnered a lot of respect from his closest colleagues who made sure his headstone had his proper name. And even gendered him correctly in the obituary, countering the salacious headlines. Unfortunately, some historians have tried to erase and subvert his identity, presenting him as merely a woman cross-dressing all those years. The U.S. National Library of Medicine, in its history of the cesarean section, editorializes that Barry was masquerading as a man when he revolutionized the technique in its Western form. Those that deny Dr. James Barry was a transgender man are currently are often TERFs, wanting to make his accomplishment as a feminist success story rather than acknowledging trans men. So,
I mean, whatever. I mean, I guess we don't really know what was going on inside his head, but like, I think the fact that his friends, who probably some of them were in on what was going on, like probably fucking made sure that he was buried under the proper name with the proper pronouns. Like,
Well, I mean,
I think that kind of suggests that like they kind of recognize
they chose to. Well, he chose to live as James Barry,
right.
so I mean,
not only that, but them alleging that he like pretended, it's absurd. It's like a comedy film. It's like Victor Victoria or some shit where like he's by night he's running around
It's
sucking
like
dick, and by day
Mulan.
he's Dr. James Barry. Yeah, it's just ridiculous fucking bullshit.
Yeah, I don't know. It's fucking
So anyway, those are some trans trailblazers for that ass, and I'm not even going to ask you if you want more. You're getting more.
getting more whether you like it or not, motherfuckers.
See you next time.
You'll eat your transos if you like it. It's a play on Cheerios. It's not very clever. Bye.
Bye.
No malarkey, Jack. Back in my day, we didn't have any entertainment at all, except for the old Scranton Village Elder. He only had 2 teeth. But that guy had a million stories. I ain't joking, Fat. We'd sit in the cold every night to hear him tell the tale of the cat he ate once. Nowadays, what with the mobile pages and the web phones and Netscapes and whatnot, it's hard to figure out what even to watch. Most days I'll just surf AOL. Lost, Jack. How do I click off the page? Why are there so many browsers open? It's all too goddamn much if you ask me. Now listen, Fat, I've got your solution. It's called the Pessimist Productions Patreon. You can click the link below and bam, all the entertainment you need, Jack. It's like Willy Wink, you know, the chocolate factory thing. Hundreds of exclusive shows. I ain't kidding. Exclusive streams, more news. You can't go wrong. So cancel that AOL. Join the Pessimist Productions Patreon now. Don't wait, or you'll be sorry, Jack.